Hello, everyone. Welcome to our talk, Infosec Metrics Your Bosses Will Love. Twilio has been scaling for a few years pretty rapidly, and the security team scaled as well. And for the last couple of years, we have been putting a lot of emphasis on metrics, both internal and external, what we provide from the security organization. And fun fact is the lead engineer who started this work a year ago is based out of Austin, and she moved on from Twilio to another job. So it's pretty hilarious that we're here in Austin talking about the project she started, and she's not here in the conference today. But yeah, if you're going to listen to us speak for a while, okay. So you probably want to know something about us. My name is Yash. I'm the interim director of security at Twilio. That means I'm really, really good at Google Sheets, Excel, budgeting, project management, things like that. And I am from the Bay Area.
And hey everyone, I'm Harini. I am a product security manager at Twilio, and I'm from Denver, Colorado.
Quick agenda for today. At Twilio, we usually start every project or every big initiative with why. So in that theme, we'll talk about why do we want metrics, then move into what metrics we can provide as a security organization, then go into how we used to do metrics for the last couple of years, what was missing from that, what went into designing the new solution, the motivations, the requirements, and then the implementation, which would go over the technical details and things like that, with a small demo. After that, we'd talk about if all of this effort worked, what we learned from it, and where we're going in the future with this effort. And we'll have ample time for Q&A at the end. Cool. So why do we need metrics? Quantification is important, and it's really hard to quantify security. A general product can be quantified in terms of revenue, customers, and things like that, but security you really can't do that. But you do need to quantify security in some way, otherwise it's going to be looked at as a cost center to the company. You're always eating money as a security team. One way to quantify security is through metrics. You could get a lot of numbers and sort of show the improvement over time of your security program, of the capabilities that you have, what you had a year ago, what you have today, where you're going next, how widely are they being used, how the adoption has changed, and how that has led to the security posture of your company changing over time. And the trends that you show over time, over the last year, last 6 months, those are really important in sort of showing that the money and resources that are going into the security program of the company really help in moving the needle. And you could take the gap analysis of this and sort of use that to argue for resources. You can just go and say, give me 10 people and $1 million. But you can say, this is what you're doing today. This is what we need to do. And to do this, we need $1 million. More likely, you'll get it then. What kind of metrics can you provide? I've broken down some of the metrics you can provide based on sort of the pillars of security. Application security, you could provide metrics on dependency security, SAST, DAST, container scans, what you're using, how widely they're being used, the rate of adoption. You could also talk about how many CVEs are present in the environment, how long have they been there, what the rate of remediation is, and things like that. Moving into patch management, you could talk about the systems with latest patches, without the latest ones, hosts that are not on the golden AMI, maybe hosts that are, say, 60 or 90 days older in terms of moving to the new AMIs. Moving along, in cloud security, you could talk about users with unused keys, IP addresses exposed to the internet, S3 buckets that maybe are unencrypted, open to the internet, or a combination of both, ALBs without WAFs, anything and everything that AWS or other cloud providers expose. And within enterprise security, you could talk about sort of EDR solutions, laptops, different types of laptops you have, Linux, Mac versus Windows, how many with or without EDR agents present. You could also do laptops on older OS or the laptops with one or more CVEs present. And with an incident response, you could talk about the total number of incidents you have had in the last X days or months, mean time to remediate, and things like that, like how long did it take to identify the root cause, how long, what did it take to page the right people, and all of those things. Offensive security, you have your traditional sort of phishing metrics, how many clicks versus how many people opened the email, how many entered their credentials, how many people reported the phish, how long did it take till the first report came in, and all of the good stuff there. Moving on, before we dive deep into the core of the metrics thing, I want to give you some context so that we're all on the same page when we go deeper. And I also needed a slide to put in some buzzwords. So I'll start with DevSecOps. Uh, we have a lot of security tooling within Twilio. We have SaaS, SaaS, container scanning, IAC, secrets, scanning, and things like that. All of those are implemented within our CI/CD pipeline. And we have automation that files tickets in the engineering team's Jira queue from the findings from all of these tools. And we also do manual reviews such as threat models, pen test, mini reviews like consults and things like that. We have our bug bounty program and we get submissions from those as well. So for the manual reviews that we do, we have a task ticket or a master ticket, which is filed in the product security team's Jira queue. And this is relevant. I'm not just going randomly into this. So TLDR on a high level, we have vulnerability tickets that are filed in the engineering team's queue, and we have task tickets that go into our own queue. And this is what we kind of used, and Harini will talk about this later, to sort of get the numbers to show how much effort we were putting in and what result was coming out. The other thing I'll probably mention is Twilio has the concept of business units or BUs. So most of the metrics that we talk about would be catered to it's like the security posture of a BU or number of P1s in a BU. You could use it pretty interchangeably and sort of identify this with, you could move it to security posture of a product or a feature group or however. It's pretty flexible that way. With that out of the way, how are we doing metrics before all of this? We have the office of the CISO, which is in charge of all the security metrics that we provide. They send out an email every month saying, hey, managers and leads, give me your metrics by the end of the week or something like that. People like me pretty much forgot and didn't do it. So I usually got another email and a slightly annoyed Slack message saying, hey, didn't you get my first email? Then I go dig out the metrics G sheet, go to each of the different tools that we have, get the data from there, go to Jira, dig out all the data from there. And this is all the data that I mentioned, tickets of threat models, findings, and all of those. And then aggregate all of them, put them in the G sheet, and then look out for any comments in the G sheet, answer those comments, and then sort of send all of those back and say, hey, metrics for this month have been updated. I wasn't really happy doing that every month. Aside from my sort of unhappiness, there were a bunch of other things that were missing. There wasn't any automation. It was like a human going and clicking a bunch of buttons, getting data and giving it. And that wasn't scalable. There wasn't a good visualization of trends. It was more like Excel sheets with numbers. Sure, there was visualization, but not enough or as much as we wanted it to be. And the data wasn't near real time. We did this on a monthly basis. So the data got stale pretty quickly. If there was a P1 mid-month, that didn't show up in the monthly metrics. It wasn't customizable for different audience. We had one set of metrics for the E team, and we had the same set of metrics for engineers as well. And that doesn't really work. We didn't have RBAC. So we did have the RBAC of the G sheet and sort of Google-backed RBAC, but all the metrics were in one G sheet, so I could fat finger somebody else's numbers too. And let's face it, it wasn't cool enough to get into any CFP. There were also a few unanswered questions. The CSO wanted to know, what data do you have for me to sort of go to the board and sort of help get more resources for you? And the E team wants to know what's the security posture of each BU. Now, we had answers to these, but every time these questions get asked, we had to go dig up the data and then answer them. And if they ask pretty regularly, which they should, again, that was a lot of manual work. And similarly, engineering managers wanted to know which ones their teams needed to fix, and they needed very different data. They needed the technical aspects of the vulnerability, the exact fix that needed to go in them. And similarly, product managers wanted to know what was wrong in their product, how to prioritize, where to start, which ones were easy wins, which needed a lot of planning, and things like that. And then over the last 1.5 years, we've been working on changing this, sort of automating the process and trying to get better at getting metrics and making them near real time. And Harini is going to talk about how we did this. I'll be back almost at the end to take credit for all of it again.
Thanks, Yash. So before we started working on the actual solution, like we had all these people just reach out to us asking for different data, and we weren't quite sure what exactly were they actually looking for. So we first started working on understanding the requirements for this, right? The first thing we wanted to understand was, what did leadership want? They wanted to get like a very high level overview of what was the security posture of all products across Twilio. What did that look like? And what are some of the key areas that we should be focusing as different business units, and where should we put our resources to work on? We then had like engineering managers and PMs reaching out and asking for different type of data. What they wanted to see was, hey, give me a list of all vulnerabilities that are P1s and P0s, and tell me what vulnerabilities have not been fixed within a given SLA. Like, I need to know that information so we can work on getting an idea to fix things soon, earlier than later. They also wanted to see, like, for my business unit, what does the trend of vulnerabilities sort of look like? Like, are we closing issues? Are we opening, like, are we having issues that are out of SLA for a longer period of time? What are some of the sources where our vulnerabilities are coming from? And by sources here, we mean some of the capabilities that we provide as product security. So we do bug bounty programs, we have pen tests that happen, we have SAST scans, DAST scans, container scans, a bunch of different things. So leadership from an engineering manager and product manager and PM standpoint, they wanted to understand, like, tell me all of this information so we can start focusing on things and figure out, like, which part of the SDLC cycle we can focus more on security and how are we capturing all these issues. One other major requirement that they had was, hey, do not give me a tool where I have to go back again, log in, I have to like go through a bunch of different things to get this data. I need something that would work well and integrate well with my day-to-day workflow. So it's easy for me when I'm doing my planning, it's easy for me to get that information, and it's right with me at that point. And when they asked us for this, we started thinking internally, like, what would be the best way for us to have some sort of an access control set on these systems? Because if we are going to just give the data out to everybody out there, what if somebody just changes something? What if somebody ends up deleting something, even by accident? So we didn't want that. So that was also one of the requirements that we had after listening to all these requirements that the other EMs and PMs had. And we as product security started building off this metrics within the larger trust and security organization at Twilio. The intention was to not show leadership just product security data. So we wanted to start off with building something, and we wanted to help other teams within security to contribute to the same concept. So we wanted to have a solution which was as extensible as possible. That way we had data coming from multiple security teams, which would all feed into this one single metrics dashboard, which will show leadership like the full picture of security within the organization. And I know I've said this a couple of times now, but different people wanted to see different data. Not everybody wanted to see the same information. So we had to build something that was very flexible so that we were able to create different metrics based on who our audiences were. And finally, with all these requirements, we internally as product security, we discussed through this, and we were like, let's build something, but let's not make it overcomplicated. And we also wanted to make sure that this solution was maintainable, because to Yash's point, if someone's going to come and ask us at any point of time to give metrics, we didn't want to go back and forth, fix our automation, do a bunch of different work to just get this data. So we wanted to make sure the solution that we came up with was easy to maintain as well. With all these requirements in hand, before moving on to the actual implementation, we did some analysis to figure out, okay, so we have these requirements, we know where our data is, but what does the data that we have look like? So to give you some context, we use all our issues are tracked using our issue management system using Jira. And what we identified was we had a bunch of different Jira projects and we had a lot of vulnerabilities within the Jira projects, but we had no context of how to map these tickets all the way up to a business unit. So we went on to figuring out how can we use the current product taxonomy within our company and map it all the way back to Jira. In that process, we worked on setting a baseline for the vulnerability ticketing process itself within the organization. So what we did as part of that was we understood that there are some key pieces of information which, if present within these tickets, would help us tell a different story or a better story to the leadership and like anybody looking at the data. So we worked with the Atlassian team within Twilio to add a few things within our vulnerability tickets, things such as vulnerability source, vulnerability category, and also the business units that a specific Jira ticket or a Jira project mapped all the way back to. We did have some of this data already within our tickets, but what we did before was we used the concept of labels within Jira. And if you're not familiar with Jira, the label system within it can get really, really messy really soon because it's case sensitive. So what we identified was for the same source, we had like 5 different labels that we had to query through. We may miss like a specific case, and we realized that we are missing a few tickets because it was case sensitive and we didn't include everything. So in that process, we had to make sure we set a baseline for tickets, and that would help us get the right data that we were looking for. So like I mentioned, there were older tickets with all these labels, so we had to make sure that we upskilled our JQL skills and got all the data that had to be part of the metrics. So once we did this groundwork, we moved on to the actual implementation. Like I mentioned, all our vulnerabilities were tracked within Jira. And it's not just vulnerabilities to what Yash mentioned. We also have like task type tickets that we track within product security to understand what are the different work and support that we provide the engineering team. So all that data was present in Jira. And we wrote an automation based on Python, which sort of collected all of this data from Jira. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. And once we got all of this data from Python, we moved on to writing that to a Google Sheet, which served as a data source for Google Data Studio for the dashboards that we were going to build out for all these metrics. Before jumping on to showing the actual metrics dashboard, just wanted to give you folks a quick understanding of why we picked this stack. Because Python was a language that most of us were comfortable with in the product security team. And it was easy because there were a lot of integrations with Python and Google Sheet with the Google libraries. So we just went with that approach. And we stick to using Google Data Sheet because Google Data Studio had the option of importing multiple data sources. It had the option of importing from SQL, from different data stores, but Google Sheets was pretty much lightweight, and we were able to easily integrate it with Google Data Studio without any additional authentication or anything like that. So we went on to just using Google Sheet. And Yash wanted us to build this metrics, but he didn't give us the budget. We did not have the budget to work on this, so we went with using Google Data Studio because there was no additional cost associated with it. And we also realized that it has a lot of rich features that we could leverage to show what the leadership and what anybody else who wanted to look for about our security posture. So with that said, I'll give a quick demo of how this all works end to end. I wanted to give a live demo, but I don't really trust the demo gods, so I just went with a live-ish version of this. So bear with me while I play this video for you and walk you through this process. Like I mentioned, Jira is our source of truth, so we got all of the information from Jira, and we just mocked up this data for the purposes of the presentation. But the way we have the automation built out is within Python, we worked on collecting all this data from Jira, but we also had to do a lot of normalization. So that's why we had the automation in place. And when I say normalization, it was essentially us trying to figure out like what severity a specific ticket aligned with, getting all information based off of labels or the new fields that we had created. We also did a bunch of calculations and everything within the automation. That way, when we wrote the data to the sheet, we had all the information that it could easily take and be fed directly to Google Data Studio. So we had information like the project information, which business unit it mapped to, different categories of vulnerabilities, the sources, things such as whether or not it was out of certain SLA timeframe and what was sort of the actual link to the tickets. And I'll talk about why we added the information about link to the tickets in a second. So this is the security metrics dashboard that we had used. And the way the dashboard is built is it's built into 3 different parts. So Google Data Studio has the option for you to create, I think, up to like 5 pages where you can have this information. So we had the very first page where we had added information that the leadership wanted to see. So the metrics dashboard essentially had information about like across the different business units, what did like P1 and P0s look like and how many were open over a certain period of time. We also showed like all vulnerabilities across all business units over a period of time and had the option of sort of filtering it through different business units to see what that trend sort of looked like and which business units had to focus more on the security issues and where we had to put our resources to work in. Moving on, the second part of this dashboard essentially was catered to be useful for the security teams ourselves. This dashboard essentially, this is just a short example of how we broke things down based on the source, but we also had information about different categories of vulnerabilities. So with both of these information, the idea was to see across all the business units, like which of our sources was giving us information about or when in the process of SDLC lifecycle were we catching vulnerabilities. So just as an example, if you could see, based on this chart that we see here, dependency scans and threat models are catching more vulnerabilities more than pen tests and bug bounty programs. So that sort of gives us an idea of how or in which stage of SDLC are we providing more support versus which stages need like much more support. And we, based on the information from categories, we could also start looking at what classes of vulnerabilities are present across different business units and what are some of the capabilities that we should be focusing on based on the classes of vulnerabilities that we are seeing across all the business units at Twilio. So this essentially is just a view that both even like leadership outside of security or within security could use. And the third and final version of this that we have is the information that EMs and PMs were looking for. So they wanted to dig deep into all the issues that were identified within their organization. So as part of that, we built this dashboard for all of those folks who wanted to see that information. So the dashboard essentially has detailed information of breakdown across different severity, source, and a small table which actually showed them information of like all the Jira issues associated with their business units or products. And as you can see, we also had the capability to filter sort of based on different business units. So folks can just go in, look at whatever data that they want to look for and get an idea of what is happening in terms of security vulnerabilities across their specific business units. The table is also can be filtered based on issues that you want to see, if it's just open issues or issues out of SLA and all that information. And just to give you a high level of what this all looks like from the backend. So you can see the data source that we have imported there is essentially the Google Sheet. And each of the fields that we set here are based on all the information that we gathered from the Google Sheet. So the table has different dimensions, and all of this information is essentially what we got based on our automation that wrote to the Google Sheets. One cool thing about Google Data Studio is that it gives you the option to actually create and customize like fields or filters within Google Data Studio itself. So you can just get all the data into your Google Sheet, and you can actually create your filters and everything within the Google Data Studio itself. You don't have to manipulate any data within your Google Sheets. And finally, to address the requirement of, hey, give me something that aligns well with my workflow, Google Data Studio has the option of embedding the metrics or the dashboard with whatever systems that we use. So we primarily use Confluence or Wiki, and that has a plugin where you can just embed HTML content. So using that option, just copied created like a HTML hyperlink to the dashboard, copied it to our wiki, and there we had the data. So teams could just directly go to their specific wiki page, look at this data within that workflow itself, and it's still interactable. You can still create filters and everything within wiki itself. You don't have to go all the way back to Google Data Studio to get this information. And it made their lives easier. So during planning, they could just pull this up. They knew what are all the things that they had to focus on for a specific sprint, and they got all of this information out of it. And finally, to handle RBAC, we just had to make sure that nobody else had access to create more filters or modify the dashboards. So we just leveraged Google's existing RBAC system, and access was given only to certain folks within the product security team. And as we integrate other teams within security, we'll give access to them. But from an engineering perspective, everybody just had read-only access, so they could just get the data that they were looking for from the dashboard. All right, that was a lot of talk. So I'll give this back to Yash to walk us through whether this worked or not, and how it helped different teams.
Cool. So we did that, and then we started publicizing it a little bit. And when we reflected of like, did this work, or was this work not worth the effort that went into it? We found that the execs liked it. I don't know if they loved it, but they're pretty receptive to it. I think they got what they wanted, because when you present a list of security issues and say the company needs to fix it, the question becomes, okay, who should I go talk to within the company? And these dashboards actually address those issues, where you could say BU X or product X needs to work on these issues, so go talk to the GM or SVP or however the titles work. So that did work. And we were able to customize the dashboards, as Harini showed you, for different audiences. We had really low-level information for PMs and engineers, and we had high-level sort of risk-level information for the leadership team. The thing that actually sealed this for me is when a couple of engineering teams came to me and said, look, you've got really valuable data, but your analytics skills suck. Can we get access to the data so we can actually create better dashboards than this? And they took that, made their own dashboards, and sort of gave them back to us, and we didn't really steal them. And product managers also got enough data to say, okay, here are P1s that are almost out of SLA or out of SLA, so they could do their sprint plannings and quarterly plannings accordingly. And all in all, we did see the needle move on this. Now, everything didn't work as we expected it to. Some stuff did break. Google Data Studio sometimes broke. Once I actually took this and was super excited to show it to my boss, and when I opened it, the integration just broke. There are a few caveats. There's a race condition actually which needs a manual refresh if you change the data source and it doesn't sync up back. And it's a 15-minute window, so if you do it within that, it sometimes needs a manual refresh. Cool. What are we going to do next? So there are a lot of data sources that can go into the dashboard. So what we're working on next is working with the other security teams within the organization to sort of get all of their data. Could be patch management, could be cloud security, could be offensive, like all of those metrics. The teams now have the capability and sort of flexibility to put their data into any source that they want to, like a database, like a G Sheet, anything that Google Data Studio supports, and then integrate it into one central metrics dashboard. And once they do that, you have all the data in one place where you can sort of come up with a risk score. Could be any formula that you come up with, things like number of P1s times 10, or how as a factor of how long they've been open, anything that you come up with, and sort of grade your products from like a security perspective and sort of really get a view that says product A is at B minus, product C is at A plus, and things like that. And parallelly, we're also working on individually customizing dashboards for different teams and getting them to habitually look at this scorecard every so often that they do planning and sort of make security part of every engineering team's planning process, because it's now, hey, look at your backlog, take a few tickets, put it into the sprint. We want it to be, look at your backlog, also look at your security backlog, and then take appropriate tickets and then put it to your sprint. Cool. That was a lot of talk, a lot of demos. We have all the data up. Slides are on Box. The Google Data Studio dashboards and the sample G sheet that went into it as a data source is also shared. It's dummy data. It's publicly accessible. Please make a copy, play around, and let us know what you think. The QR code, I promise, is not malicious. It'll take you to a folder which has all of these things in there for you to download and play around with. And I have to do this. We have around more than 10 security jobs open. We like to do things differently, so if you're interested, please take a look. We'll be around here for the rest of the day if you want to come chat with us. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Do you look at any vendors or other tools that might be similar things before you start down the path?
We did look at a few vendors, and in the spirit of the conference, I'm not going to go through what each vendor did, but what we found out as a general theme was all of the vendors were needing you to do vulnerability management a specific way, and that's when they give you the metrics. So what it meant was we take what we used to do and then change it completely into how they want us to do, and then get the metrics. And that's something we didn't want to do. Yes?
We have a very similar tool set with Jira and Confluence. And I saw you use a little something enhancing for HTML to bring Google Docs into Confluence.
Yep.
Where you got that?
That's just a plugin available within Atlassian store for Wiki or Confluence. So, and it's I think easily available. They don't charge for it. You can just integrate that, and that will help you with integrating whatever data that you're looking for.
Would you have done anything differently if you were working with BUs that had thousands of security issues in their backlog? You know, like say a legacy product?
The way we kind of approached this is we didn't go all in and say, here's all of your data, because that, as we all know, gets messy. The approach we took was get all the P1s, get all the vulnerabilities that have a fix available and sort of more actionable, and sort of go step by step. That would probably apply to any product group or BU that has a lot of security tech debt. Yes?
So you have threat modeling on there as a metric. Were people creating JIRAs for every threat they found while doing threat modeling?
There were two kind of metrics we got from there. One is how many threat models we were doing. So the threat model master ticket, as I like to call it, is a ticket that we file for ourselves saying, hey, we're doing a threat model for this team. So that tells us how many threat models we're doing per business unit, how many we are not doing per one. So if there's a business unit that has like 0 threat models in the last 30 days or 60 days, that's a gap we need to address. And then coming to the actual threats we found, yes, we were filing tickets in the engineering team's queue for the findings from the threat models, and they would have sort of the categories and sort of information of this is the business unit, this is the finding from a threat model. So automatically from Jira in the dashboard, it would show up as like 7 or 8 items from a threat model in Q1 or Q2 were found. Yes.
You had mentioned that some teams created their own, I guess, specific dashboards. Can you talk a little bit about how that helped them?
So What they were looking for is more super granular per team. So they took the data and based on the fields we had in the G sheet, made filters that would give them exactly that, because Team A didn't care how many open tickets Team B had to some extent, right? I mean, yes, when you gamify things, that's a different story. But when you're doing sprint planning, you want to know exactly how many tickets are in your backlog to be able to pull some. So those were the things that they built filters for. Awesome. Thank you for your time. And if you have any more questions, we'll be hanging around here.